Okay, welcome to episode 122 of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm delighted to be speaking to Pete Hunt. Pete is a leading men's group facilitator, podcast host, and meditation teacher, and he is also the founder of Monumental, which is a network for growth-focused leaders. Welcome, Pete.
Thanks for having me, Piers. It's great to be here.
I was just reflecting actually, but preparing today. I like to sometimes say where I met people, and I remember it was at the boarding school survivors workshop about 2 years ago, and you came up to me and we had a conversation. I remember us speaking about you coming on the podcast, so here you are.
Here we go. Yeah, a good bit of manifestation there. I remember, yeah, that was my first, I guess, foray into what boarding school survivors is and was. And I'd been doing some reading then for, I guess, about 6 months or so. Nick's books, Joy's books, and then I saw your book on the counter there, and I thought, oh, there's a famous author. Better go and tap him up. So yeah, here we are, two years later, and many conversations and lots of admiration for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, how I'd love for us to begin is for you just to share a bit of your journey. How have you got into setting up Monumental, doing this work around men's mental health, and setting this network up?
Sure. I mean, how long have you got, Piers? I could go on. I could go on for days on this, but perhaps I can give the backstory, my life backstory, which is really sort of the evolution towards where I am today and where we are today. And to start out, it's one story of many. Now that speaking to so many men that I do on a day-to-day basis, I recognize that my story is not that unique to men who had a privileged upbringing in the 80s and 90s. Um, and so I'll start back then. Um, in
Okay.
1982, no, I won't go that far, but basically, I was very lucky to be born into a very loving family with two older sisters. My father was an accountant. My mum, back then, I was looking after the kids. And we moved down to Surrey as I was 6 months, and we moved into this beautiful home that my parents still live in. Beautiful garden, very sort of idyllic community in Surrey. And what I can remember of my childhood was extremely happy, playing with lots of dogs, beautiful relatives. My grandparents were alive, and we had lots of cousins, and it was absolutely fantastic. Went to the local state primary until I was seven, and then as you know, I would say I was fortunate enough to be given this lineage of privilege, right? This what my father went to work for, and what we knew and what he was doing his best for his children by sending both my sisters and myself to these elite schools. Um, and my prep school was one in Surrey. It's called Aldro. Um, it was well known for being extremely good at sport, having a good headmaster, a guy from a military background who was a kind man, had a kind wife, and he was generally known as a kind but strict man. I The story starts really as going in there as a 7-year-old, and then within months thankfully it was picked up by a very loving teacher called Flora McCullum, who then became aware of my dyslexia, aware of my struggles. The problem is that I was called dyslexic, and as a result, then called dyslexic with no actual outlet at that moment for what that looked like in terms of development. It looked like extra English. So from that point on, aged 8, I was pushed into extra English, and I was taken out of things like music and art and DT and things that I knew as a 30-year-old that I was, which was creative. But
Mm.
from the ages of 8 to 30, I had this mindset that I was a stupid little boy. Little because I'm not that tall, as you know, and never have been. Stupid because that's the identity. That's what I created, that belief system that I created when I was dyslexic, told I was dyslexic. And then boy, because I was known affectionately as in my family as boy. But I mean, how many times were you called a stupid boy as well? I mean, you know, so it was basically put into my belief system that I was a stupid little boy. And it's important to understand that context to where I am today and where and what I have developed, because it was at that pinnacle point really that I developed um, that I guess quite sad belief. And as a result, I went through school. I was very good at sport. Can hear a few of my friends chuckling. I've said that I was a really good sportsman before, and I've been cut down on podcasts for saying that. But I was in, the first team for football and hockey, and cricket, and things were good on the surface. I had good friendships. My mum came to work because she found out that I was dyslexic. She retrained. She became a dyslexic teacher. It was a really actually wonderful story. So when I was actually, and I guess this is a prevalent part of this story, when I was became a boarder aged 11, my mum was actually there 3 or 4 days a week. So I didn't have, whilst I felt the effects of being a boarder, at least my mum, got to see my mum until I was 13. The importance around that, again, it comes back to the fuller story that I will eventually come round to. But it came to the point where basically I was 12, 13. I'd had that boarding school or prep school experience, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more during the podcast. But it was decided. All my friends went off to a local school called Charterhouse, and I went off to a school called Bradfield because my parents thought I was. My parents thought that that was a better academic school for me, and ultimately at the time it was a better fit. The problem with that was that I was mercilessly bullied. I was and that really did take on effect. It was a different culture. It was not this sense of gentle countryside prep school that I've been to. It was a really um, merciless environment. And then I was lucky enough, however, and the more I speak to men now, the more I see how lucky I was to have the mother and father that I did have, because they saw and heard me. They actually heard me. I said, "Mum, Dad, I'm being bullied. This year is just a dud year." And it was. I'm not saying I'm not having it in any way having a go at the school. It was just a dud year. Plenty of the other boys left, and my parents went straight to one of my great friends from prep school, Dad, who was a housemaster at Charterhouse, and in I went, and off I went. And at Charterhouse, I pretty much excelled again in the sports field. I really struggled, and again, this is part of the story, in my academia. And this belief was more and more entrenched because at Charterhouse there was a lot of Oxford and Cambridge going on. There's a lot of that chat. Even a lot of the teachers were from there. So this culture of academia, I basically was kind of ignored. I mean, we're talking 25 years ago now, right? Times have changed, but I was basically ignored academically. I remember my father being fairly furious at one of the economics teachers, but regardless of that, it just didn't work for me. And what I found out later is that I was suffering from chronic anxiety on a day-to-day basis. I had an absolute fear of going to the classroom because I just simply was not cut out for the academic level that was there. And they didn't have the resources to support me. Again, I was taken out of anything outward bound, nature bound, and I was given extra this, extra English. And it was just like, you will learn to spell, of course. And all that did was dent my sense of self-worth. And so what I came out as the jock jacket wearing hockey player, cricket player. I played 3 years in both teams, and I got away with it. But when I came out of school, I was not prepared. I was not at all prepared for what was to come. And what was to come was the harsh reality of the real world. So bringing that full circle, and I'll swing through this a little bit more, but I went off to university. I became a chartered surveyor at Knight Frank, mainly because I played golf with the right person. And in those days, that was what happened. I got fired or sorry, I should say, made redundant in the financial crisis. And off I went to Hong Kong, where this underlying anxiety came through into panic attacks. And I remember having my first panic attack, and the chair, he probably doesn't know this, but the chairman of Allen and Overy Asia, and I was sitting in front of him, and I was telling him why he needed, this was my job, why he needed to move offices. And inside, I was going, he does not need to move offices. Like, he just doesn't need to. But I was telling him because it was going to earn me a fat fee. And just this sense of this bullshit inside me just rose up in sheer terror, in sheer panic. And it was at that moment that I realized just how vulnerable men were. I'd heard about this mental health thing. I'd heard about anxiety. I'd heard about depression. I was just like completely oblivious to it. I had no idea what was going on. Around me, I was drinking, I drank socially pretty heavily in my 20s and 30s. But what that moment did was made me realize just how vulnerable men are. Um, doesn't matter where you come from, as I just explained, privileged upbringing, loving family. And suddenly I was having panic attacks on the streets of Hong Kong. And it was brutal. And, my heart goes out to anyone who's experienced that. It really is brutal. Um, and I didn't have any tools. I didn't know where to turn. Therapy was for lunatics. That was my belief, thought process, understanding. And all I thought was, I need to run. I need to get out of here. I just broken up with a girlfriend. A big deal had just gone south. I was probably dabbling in things that I shouldn't have been dabbling in on quite a few levels. And I was offered this experience to go to Bali, to live in Bali, and to buy beaches. So this, you know, I was just like, how has that come around? I was age 28, and I just thought, you know what? I'm going. I've never been to Bali, but this sounds like a great job. I love the sea, I love nature, and we get to raise a bunch of money and go and buy some land out there. So that took me to Bali Piers, and I recognize that I'm going on a little bit, but this,
No, this is wonderful.
yeah, okay. Well, this brings me to a place where I never imagined myself being ever. If I think about my upbringing, I was 8,000 miles away from home. I was buying beaches. I was out in the middle of nowhere in Timbuktu in Indonesia. It was Timbuktu. No, I wasn't there. I was more in Lombok, Sumbawa, Flores, Komodo National Park. It was just a dream. We were, and we were on the back of just some incredible growth that was happening in Indonesia at the time. So, but what happened was there I was asked questions of myself that had never been asked questions. I'd never been asked these questions of what's your purpose in life? What are you doing here? What do you really want to do with your life? I was just like, I don't know, make money. That's basically what the indoctrination was. Go to the schools, get the right job, get into a private equity company, which I'd done. And it was like, but these wonderfully earthy, curious, beautiful women that resided in Bali and do reside in Bali were just mesmerizing me with the level of depth that they wanted from me. And I just didn't have it. So these constant, um, these constant stories just kept on happening. I would just keep sabotaging relationships. I'd keep sabotaging business relationships. And by the time effectively I was 34, 2015, 16, I got into a relationship with someone who just showed me every shadow, every little corner of Pete came out, and it was pretty ugly. It was just pretty ugly. And so again, having had that sense of panic in Hong Kong, I came all the way through to this sense of, okay, I can't actually drink myself through this. I can't banter my way through this. I have to face this. And this is where, Piers, it gets to where I am today. I went off to America, to Australia, and I joined various different personal development groups. And group being the word, because I walked into these groups and I sat down, and for the first time in my life, I was seeing people speak their utter truth, right from the soul, right from the heart. And I just was, it was extraordinary. It was just, I know that sounds mad, but it was extraordinary after 34 years to actually hear people speak to me about the truth of what's going on in their heart. I'd never really heard this happen before in a group session, one to one a little bit, but in a group. Whew. So that's where I learned to speak my truth. I learned, and people say, "Oh, speak your truth." Most people go, "What does that even mean?" I have no idea what you're talking about. But what it felt like was I wasn't embarrassed to speak. There was no mask. No one was judging me. I was just sitting there saying how I feel about life, and with this sense of knowing that without this sense of judgment, without this sense of expectation. In these places in Australia and America, no one necessarily knew where I'd come from or what I'd been doing. And so I was just sitting there as a human. I was just sitting there as Pete, and they were just listening. And so, yeah, it's there where I just thought, wow, this is insanely powerful. But what if I could get men together from a similar background or a similar mindset of, well, I've been given everything or I've got everything, but yet still something is missing. And that evolved over a few years into the Privileged Man podcast, which is me owning my privilege, but also expressing how privilege for me comes through a sense of mental and emotional well-being and not necessarily just the material well-being. And then that manifested into Monumental. And that came through over COVID when the essentially the old age tradition of men's circles could be taken online because everyone just adopted Zoom. And essentially that's where we are today. We're a network, we're based in the UK, but we have guys who are calling in from all over the world. So in a nutshell, a very big nutshell, that's my story.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing. I've obviously heard bits of it in our conversations we've had over the years. And thank you. In hearing what you said, that really touched me. Stupid little boy, that belief. And it kind of resonated a bit with what I picked up from school was you're a piece of shit. That was my belief. I'm a piece of shit. So the stupid little boy, it's like, and I've heard many people say similar. That was the way we almost protected ourselves with that inner critic beating ourselves up because it was that much preferable to have that voice telling us we're a stupid little boy rather than the other kids in the dormitory doing that. So yeah, thank you. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit. What's kind of the mindset that you brought that came out of boarding school? It sounds like you didn't have anything, it wasn't any big T traumas, but what was the legacy that you kind of left with that you then realized when you're 34, 35? Oh my, yeah, this is what I left with.
Yeah, good one. I think the word that comes up is competition.
Mm.
Everything to me was about winning, and I was not a good loser. And ultimately, because the dyslexia came through into my property life, where you can imagine I can hardly read the BFG now to, my kids, let alone going into London and reading Victorian age leases, let alone going to Hong Kong and write and reading and trying to communicate in Cantonese and English. Jeez. And then to add to that, Indonesia and Bahasa Indonesia. So I mean, I what came apparent is that when I could, I sound like Trump here, when I stopped winning, right? When I couldn't win, when people were just far more capable of me, I just, in terms of reading property leases and therefore being able to be good graduates and associates, I just felt that sense of um, being a loser, and I didn't know how to lose. Right, I just had this massive mentality of you're a leader, and leadership means winning. and you have to win at all costs. So I had to learn some humility. That's really what I had to learn. I had to learn some humility and recognize that the privilege that I had been given wasn't going to take me everywhere in life. And it is actually what was inside and the real Pete, as opposed to the masked Pete, which was going to actually take me places and get me the life that I actually wanted. So it's a roundabout way of just saying, Piers, like it made me an ultimate competitor.
Mm. Thank you. When you think of what makes a great leader nowadays, you know, what I'm hearing is you left with this idea you're a leader by default. You've just got to push, you've got to win at all costs. I mean, what now? Now you've done this work for a while. What makes a benevolent leader? What makes a leader, an exemplary leader?
Emotional intelligence,
Yeah, great.
bottom line, bottom line. And if that is not learned now, you are going to fall way behind. I mean, artificial intelligence is going to take over normal, what we have rewarded in terms of intelligence. What artificial intelligence doesn't have is emotional intelligence and human intelligence, and intelligence to read the room. And so that, for me, is what makes great leaders. And I would also say on top of that, that that doesn't mean that it means soft leaders. The world needs strong men. It needs a healthy masculinity. It doesn't need, dare I say this word, a toxic masculinity. So we need to embody the king and the warrior and the magician all at the same time. And that is what I know you are very well read on the archetypes. So, but to anyone who hasn't read about that, I'm talking about being a grounded leader and someone who is willing to not be tyrannical in a sense, make sure that people are listened to and show emotional intelligence because that will create an incredible loyalty.
Mm. Mm. Great definition. I've heard that quite a few over the last few years from different people we've interviewed, leadership experts for the documentary
Mm.
about emotional intelligence, the importance of that. I almost, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I feel that the boarding school system creates command and control leaders. It doesn't create emotionally intelligent leaders. I mean, what's your obviously your experience of that? What do these schools create?
I think I think talking in generalisms around this, I just would caveat that I think the system is different now compared to when I was at school. I think there is more of an emphasis on it, emotional intelligence than there was. But what do I see in my day to day from men who went to boarding school in the 70s, 80s, and 90s generally, maybe early 2000s? I'd say there is still an ingrained sense of entitlement. There is an ingrained sense that, which came out on a day-to-day basis, that you are built to be a leader. And if you don't listen to me, you're wrong. And so there is this sense of, I would say, that it has built a culture of bad listeners. And that's where, I mean, all you have to really do is look at the infighting in the House of Commons to recognize this isn't just necessarily a boarding school thing, but we're not good listeners. Generally, men in leadership have bullied their way to the top, particularly in the political field, not through a sense of being an empathetic, emotionally intelligent leader. So I can't really comment for what's going on at the moment because I haven't had much to do with the schools in the last 20 years. But if I'd say what's the output of it, it's men who are getting pretty exhausted with the battle of command and control, and recognizing that it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work in relationship with their kids, and it doesn't work in relationships with Gen Z at work. It's just different mentality. It's just not going to happen. So, hence the importance of, as I put it, doing the work as a man, um, you know, as a man in your 40s and 50s and 60s, if you want to remain relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. What would you say is doing the work? What helps to cultivate that emotional intelligence that, from what I'm hearing, yeah, the AI is going to take over the more intellectual side. But how do we develop, in your experience, this emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think becoming aware, becoming aware of your story, becoming aware of the indoctrination that you've been subjected to involuntarily as a child, and becoming aware of the good, being grateful for that, for the sense of privilege, network opportunities that it gave, but also being humble in the sense of what it didn't give you, and learning that you may be an adult, you may be an MD, you may be a CEO of something, but there's always a chance to learn. And coming back to, yeah, come back to that word, being humble and recognizing that you do have, like every human being, you do have a past that is influencing every single moment of your life. So if you haven't dealt with certain things that happened, and that again, Gabor Mate's big T and small t, that can be small t's. You may not have been sexually abused. You may not have been, uh, you know, all the big T's. I won't go through them all, but all the big T's. But if you went to boarding school as a 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, up to 13, 14, in my opinion, in a sense, there is a little boy in there or a little girl who was abandoned. It was, as Nick Duffel calls it, privileged abandonment and normalized neglect. Just become aware of it. Just get curious about it and recognize that actually it has had some kind of effect on you. You don't, whether you want to do something about it or not, but I just beg, I beg of men to really look, have the courage to look, just have a look, because the ones who do become superpowers.
Mm, mm, great. I love that. I was thinking, following on from our conversation we had on your podcast a few days ago, I was thinking almost these schools, they take us up to about 30–40% of our potential. And because there's no emotion connected, maybe that's changed now, but certainly for that generation, it's almost like you said, it's when we unlock that emotion, we show that vulnerability, that humility, we can then move into superpower. We can go from 40 up to 100%. As I said on the podcast with you 2 days ago, you know, leadership is a relationship. It is relationship. But if we don't have connection to emotion, there's nothing there. It's command and control. You do as I said, there's no relationship there. And suddenly, yeah. So I think that's brilliant what you're saying.
Yeah, awesome.
So moving into groups, then obviously you facilitator got a lot of groups and linking in to those aspects you're talking about, vulnerability, humility, about being emotionally intelligent. How do you find that plays out within the group? Do you find people are quite reserved at the beginning and don't want to talk?
Yeah. Ultimately, yeah, my experience now of facilitating, I think, over 600 men's groups.
Wow,
I know it's
well
been
done. Amazing.
It's been quite a few. Yeah. And absolutely everyone's a privilege. Absolutely. So much. There's always something to learn. Always something to learn off someone. It's just it's amazing. Um, it's an interesting question, Piers. I guess for me, the hardest part of this process is reaching out. The hardest part of this whole process is putting your hand up and going, you know what? That would be good for me. That actually sounds healthy. And going, instead of maybe choosing, oh, I'm just going to ring bread for a pint and knock it on the head on Friday. And that's the way of dealing with your internal landscape is to actually consider another way, consider another modality to process your internal landscape. And I think, when I look at it, once the men are in the group and it's the same experience I had in America, you hear that one or that first or that second person start to just open up and it's completely normal. And the men in the group are just nodding their heads and no one's sort of sitting there in judgment or telling each other how to do what or whatever. You just go, okay, this feels pretty good. And what I ask of the men in each group that I facilitate right at the end is to just take a deep breath into what we've just been experiencing and say one word that explains how you feel at the moment. And words like peaceful, calm, gratitude come up. That has got to be worth giving a go. How many men walk around, particularly in the UK, the streets of London, or in their busy lives, and go, I feel really grateful. I feel really peaceful. I feel really calm. It's a new experience. It's a new experience. It's coming home to that inner child. It's coming home to that boy and that sense of joy, that sense of fun, and being okay with that sounding a little cringy. Being okay with like, you know what? I'm just pretty fed up with the way that I feel, and I actually need to do something about it. And yeah, these guys, with beards and top knots talking about their emotions, they sound like complete weirdos, but maybe they've got something going. And my, unfortunately, I can't grow a top knot anymore, but I'm trying with the beard, not as strongly as you. Um, but I think we do have something going. And, the men who are in these groups, not just Monumental, but, there are so many awesome, awesome opportunities out there. I'd just say go and give it a go.
Mm, yeah, great, great. Yeah, and as you were saying that, it kind of, as I've been reading Kouzes and Posner's book, The Leadership Challenge, which has interviewed 150,000 people about their leadership experiences, and they've done 40 years of clinical data. And they were saying the number one, they've got five key traits for what makes a great leader. And the first one is model the way. And it's almost like that's what I'm hearing with your groups is those first few men who are sharing, they're modeling the way. And then the others go, and that's what we need to start doing as us as leaders. And they say that leadership is self-development. We've got to go within. We've got to, oh, what am I feeling? Model that if that's what we want those who we are leading to do as well.
100%. Absolutely. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be embodied. And there is we know there's a whole host of people out there who are um, doing this work or, putting it forward, but it's got to be embodied. And
Yeah.
you've got to be practicing it on a daily basis. Otherwise, it's not real and you get found out very quickly.
Mm. How do we do that on a day-to-day basis? How do we practice it on a daily basis? If you're not used to this, you're listening to this conversation, you're like, where would I start? What would
Yeah.
you where what would you
One,
say?
yeah, one very simple way of starting it would be this. It may make you feel pretty uncomfortable when you first do it.
Mm.
But when we came onto the call, we before we started the recording, we checked in with each other, which was a man to man, how are you feeling? And so I say one of the most powerful and quick and easy things to do is to switch the how you doing, mate, to how you feeling.
Yeah.
And if you don't get an answer that is coming from the heart, try again. I didn't, when someone says how you feeling and you get a response which goes, yeah, I'm all right. That's not a feeling. How are you feeling? Check in with your heart. And if you don't want to do it with your best mate, go and try it on someone at work. Go and try it, maybe even, dare I say it, with a woman, because you're going to get a response and you're going to hear the difference and you're going to feel the difference, and then go and try it out on a man again and see how you go. That's as I say, quick and dirty into how to start changing the what you're hearing in your own space.
That's brilliant. I love that. I mean, if you've really dissociated, many of my clients who come to me have really split off from their emotions through their experiences as children or in boarding school, and they don't want to look. What do we do then if, you know, what could we suggest to people who don't want to look?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've got two answers to that. One um, is to start pushing them towards, or pointing, not pushing, never pushing, pointing
Mhm.
towards the writing that is done. There are so many incredible books, and they are relevant, and some are more relevant to others. So find the relevant book for that person. I mean, but the other one, which I would always veer more towards, is be the change you wish to see in the world.
Mm.
Be that inspiration. Whether whether you're a husband and you're struggling with contact with your wife, or the other way around. And as a wife, you're really struggling. You may be listening to this, really struggling with what you think is an emotionally dysfunctional man. And it's really, you can't control it. You can't control them. You can only control your own destiny. And eventually, there's either sink or swim. And I know that sounds quite brutal, but my experience of trying to change my family, and I say in the broader sense, or when I was first introduced to this work, I was like, "You've got to do this. You've got to do
Yeah.
this." They
So,
all thought I'd gone mental, which maybe in a small way I had got out of my mind, as which was a good thing. I needed to get out of my mind at that point. Um, but yeah, but just as I said, come back to the sense of embodiment, be the change you wish to see in the world, and hope that people notice. That's the ethos that I go around with today.
mm. That's beautiful. It reminds me of clients as clients have started to change, they've started to change the children have started to change, then their partners, and then the places they're working, and it's like it's incredible. You know, I've heard this saying that it's not with our children or with anyone, it's not by what we say that it's important, it's by what we do. We've got to, coming back to that first point, model the way.
Mm.
We've got to be the change we want to see in the world. And I think if we can see that, oh, it can be very joyful. It can be enlivening. We're energized. Um,
Absolutely. Be, do, have, right? It's
mm,
that, and we are pretty much taught to do, have, be.
yeah. Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah.
it's totally the other way around. It's
We,
totally the other side. It's to be, do, have.
yeah. So be, do, have. Yeah. Someone said, can't remember who it was, but we're we're human doings rather than human beings.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
So some of the areas I'd love to kind of segue into is this idea of isolation.
Mm.
Because I think often, whether you're a leader, whether you've been to boarding school, you've had this privileged upbringing. I hear this a lot with my clients about this feeling of isolation. I'd
Mm.
love you to talk a little bit about that. Is that something you see? And
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, earlier on in my diatribe about my life, I failed probably to mention that the feeling that I had most when I was 30, whenever I was 34, was sheer isolation. I wasn't lonely. I was living in Bali, but this could, people may be living in the middle of London and feel like this. But literally everything had been cracking around me or was cracking around me. And I'd chosen this path, this different pathway to healing. I said, no, I'm not going to go and get drunk. No, I'm not going to go and sleep with lots of women. I'm just not going to do that anymore. I am going to work out how, excuse my French, the fuck this happened to me. And it was at that point that I stopped basically going out and getting drunk and all the rest of it. And I recognized that a lot of the people I've been surrounding myself with were good time guys, good time guys and good time girls. My phone used to ring off the hook. I was called Push Up Pete at one point because my party trick was doing push ups on the bar. Right. I know. So there was the change, and people go that that immortal line at school, you've changed. And like I had changed. I really had changed, and it had been quite stark. And it had been very, very fast. And I think a lot of people were like, well, where's Party Pete gone? This isn't fun. You're not fun anymore. And to be honest, I don't think I was very fun at that point. I was taking myself very seriously. I'd gone into a very internal state and had these huge, huge realizations about myself, the world's direction, and my own direction. And I just put a lot of hand out to a lot of people in my life at that point, going, my God, you don't even understand. You're not conscious, bro. And and so a lot of people really got, the hand. And whilst that felt good in a way because it was a less toxic environment, everything went very quiet. So I created my own loneliness. I created a sense of loneliness because suddenly there weren't people around me, as many people around me, but I was totally in a state of isolation, in a physical sense. Online, I was talking to various different personal development things that I was doing. So I felt supported in that, um, but lonely in that moment. And I should come back to before that happened. Before that happened, I wasn't lonely. And this may be more relevant, actually, thinking about it. I wasn't lonely. I was surrounded by people. I was well loved for the identity that I was coming across as at the time, as I say, party Pete, push up Pete, whatever you want to call him. But I was totally isolated, right? So I was a soulful, loving, kind, um, screaming child inside. I was like, no one knows who I am. That was the voice. No one knows who I really am. And I didn't know how to express it because I was a stupid little boy. I had created this identity of a sidekick, right? So I'd been the vice captains of hockey and cricket and football and etc. etc. I was never captain. And that played out in my adult life. I played it out in the corporate life where I hero worshipped my bosses. And then I played it out in my entrepreneurial life where I hero worshipped the guys who wanted to partner with me. And there was a lot of empath narcissist going on, and without going into a huge amount of that um, psychology, it always ended up in disappointment for me because they never could live up to the person that I had in their mind that they were. So effectively, I'm sure a few of them are listening to this as well, but it's, effectively what happened to me is that I had withdrawn my true self. In fact, that was withdrawn when I was 8 years old, like it is for so many other men out there. But it had become this, I was a sidekick, and I just had no sense of being able to speak up because I was so worried about people pleasing. I was so worried about saying the right thing or doing the right thing that I just simply didn't speak up for myself and I wasn't my own self. It created absolute havoc in my life, Piers. Physically, mentally, emotionally, economically. The fact that I could not be myself, and I do mean be myself, created, almost Armageddon in my life. Right. It took me to a very, very low point. And that was the point. That's when I scratched the surface and I came back. I came back to life and became a human being. I'm by no means perfect, but I don't know if that really answers your question, but that was a sort of journey within that sense of what isolation felt and what loneliness felt. Um, neither of them are comfortable feelings at all, but they are feelings I know that many male leaders feel on a day-to-day basis, even men in their 50s, 60s. In fact, it almost gets worse the older you get, because the more programmed you get of not expressing the way that you feel, the more distance, the more lonely you're going to feel. And on top of that, the more isolated you're going to feel.
Mm, thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for your honesty. That loneliness and that isolation. It's interesting what you were saying about those people around you, but feeling, very kind of lonely at the same time. I think it was lonely, isolated, but and I guess I could relate again in my 20s in London. I kept everyone at arm's length. And, we talked a couple of days ago about avoidant, about keeping people at arm's length. That's one of the things that people, specialists I've spoken to on the podcast, saying that's what boarding school creates, is that avoidant, that we keep intimacy at arm's length. We diminish the importance of them. And that's what I did. Didn't want to get close to anybody. I was too frightened because when I had let people in there, let me down in a big way. But yeah, it's that feeling of totally being isolated, even in a group. No one knows me.
Well, I mean, now you say it, that sense, that feeling, if I really feel into it, of being in a dormitory of 15 other boys, being left there early on, and yeah, you're surrounded by your friends and whatnot. Oh my God, did I feel isolated? You're not going to speak your truth in that environment for fear of getting absolutely beaten. And I mean, again, I speak to what it was like. I don't know what it is like, but I could say that I can only say that to my own experience. I mean, um, that's where that came from. And again, you'd say anything to the older boys to remain in their good books, and you'd say anything really to your friends to remain cool. Why? Because you don't want to get bullied.
Mm.
So it's the same thing. You come out of, come out of school with that learned behavior, and take it into the real world. You're never going to get what you really want because you don't know how to say what you really want.
Mm. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's that going within. What is it? You mentioned when you were talking at the beginning, you were asking these questions, being asked these questions in Bali. Well, what is it I want? And it was, oh, I don't, make money. And and it's like that doesn't, we need purpose. We need to know we exist and making money. Yes, that's important on one level, but we need something greater. I think David Brooks in his book Second Mountain says most of us are on that first mountain, which is the extrinsic. It's money, it's fame, it's the lovely the house. But he says actually we really want to move to the second mountain, which is a place of service. How may I give my gift? Which for me is almost moving from the boy archetype, the girl archetype on the first mountain. It's all about me. What can I get? To the adult. How may I serve?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. This has been, yeah, wonderful. Conversation. So, uh, kind of one of the,
I would speak briefly, Piers.
yeah,
I've married an American.
yeah.
And even now, with all of this work that I've done, I'll eat some humble pie here. She's just like, can you just say what you feel? Can you just say what you're actually trying to say? Because they're so literal. They're
Mhm.
so literal in the way in which they talk to one another. Is that this sort of farting about in these sort of in this Englishness that I have. It's it's a daily challenge. It's a daily challenge. Even though I've done a gazillion men's circles, it's hardwired, right? It's hardwired to be a be a people pleaser and not to let people down.
Mm.
And that is very difficult, especially when it comes to relationships and love.
Yeah.
And a lot of men that I know of are like, yeah, she left me, and they turn out to be the victim of. But what have they actually created? What could they not say? What were the needs that they needed met that they could not come alive with and say out loud to their partner? And it happens time and time and time again. Is it any surprise that 70, I think over 70% of divorces are filed by women?
Mm.
That's what I just wanted to add in that. That's, there's,
Yeah, and I have the same issue myself. And I think one of the things is it's a life journey, and that inner critic that is so virulent in these high performing people that I work with is actually to start turning that down, challenging that, bring the benevolent voices in that, oh yeah, I messed up again. It's like, yeah, my wife said something to me yesterday about that. What is it you're saying? What do you feel? I'm like, oh yeah, thank you. I've asked you that question again rather than going what I'm feeling. So yeah, I can
yeah.
resonate. Um, so I guess one of the final aspects I'd love to hear is accountability. What's the importance for the work you do, the importance of accountability, especially for men or in those groups, I guess. I find that in my coaching work is it's useful to ask at the end, well, what are two or three things you'd like to commit to? So what about accountability?
Yeah, I mean, account, it has that word in it. And my father being an accountant and me saying, no, I will never be an accountant. Anything which has account in it or being held to account. One, I push that because that's sort of what I identify account with. He'll be chuckling to that. And then the second bit is that there's a sense of discipline within the word accountability. And discipline way back when at school was seen as a negative thing. It was seen like as a I will discipline you rather than discipline being a an act of self-love. That's where I have got to with discipline. And discipline, if you are so self-disciplined that you can, there are people in the world who are very, very well self-disciplined and they can get on with it. But the vast majority of people in the world, and especially with this niche of men who went to boarding school, and a lot of them started to rebel, right? Or were rebels. Nick Duffel talks about it, rebel strategic personality. I work with a lot of these rebels, right? Who have come out of school, they've gone and done something which is, well, they've been very successful, but they perhaps have identified the discipline with something negative. And what I bring that back down to, as I say, is you can try and be disciplined on your own, but it's a lot easier if you do it with somebody else. And so what the way in which we bring it in on a weekly basis is to talk about what our declarations are. At the end of a call, we talk about what our declaration is as a result of the awareness that we've just built. And through that, it's a micro step forward. For me, 2 weeks ago, we were talking about our relationships. To me, I recognized that I was spending a lot of time with my wife, but not enough quality time. So the point of accountability, my declaration was to write into the group, into the WhatsApp group that we have, I'm going to find a time to take my wife on a date. So these are small things, but they have big ripple effects. It could be I'm going to speak to my mother-in-law and tell her how I really feel about her interfering in my marriage. And just for clearance, I'm not talking about my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
I'm talking about things that I have heard within the group. So that's it. You can go out and try and do these things. It's a bit like, it's a bit like New Year's resolutions. I declare I'm going to do this. Why don't they work? Is because there is a lack of accountability. They've certainly got, people set New Year's resolutions with good intentions, but intentions don't go anywhere without accountability.
Mm.
And men, we're particularly as I say in this niche, are very busy. There's a lot of pressure, particularly in the current environment, a lot of pressure to perform. And as a result, it's just easy. It's life becomes easier when you have someone who understands, they're in the sort of same trench with you, and they understand where you've been, what you're going through, and what you're trying to achieve. So
Mhm.
yeah, accountability is really actually just bringing discipline back into your life and seeing it as an act of self-love.
Mm. Yeah, lovely, lovely. So, as we start to wrap this up, are there any areas or anything it's come to you you'd love to share with my audience that you're like, oh yeah, I'd love people to know about this or
Yeah, I think yeah, my felt sense is we both feel very passionate about the people that we work with, and we know that we're just scratching the surface. You know, that's ultimately what I'd like to share towards the end is this is not a state of you are some kind of victim and therefore you need some kind of therapy. Everyone has a past and everyone has a past to deal with. If you don't deal with it, there are consequences from being in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They're different consequences, but they become more and more significant the older you become. So I guess my parting wish is to invite as many men into awareness. I'm not even going to say the work, but just come into awareness and start to have a look, scratch the itch, go and have a look because there's a lot of peace and there's this sense of joy that is available in life if we're brave enough to try and unearth it.
What amazing words. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. How do people find out more about you, Pete?
Well, you won't hear me speaking as much, which is probably a blessing on the Privileged Man podcast. That's available on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Haven't been going for quite as long as you, Piers, but I'm giving it a good crack. Um, and if you want to hear more from Piers, he'll be on very shortly.
All right.
Um, and then monumental.global is our network for growth focused leaders. And yeah, just hop onto the website monumental.global, and there's loads more information there.
Great. Well, bless you for your work. It's such important work. I think the groups, the authenticity, the vulnerability, and how you model that. So, thank you. It's
Well,
a privilege speaking to you today.
thank you for having me, Piers. It was great. Thank you.
Okay. See you later.